Welcome to another episode of Two Average Joes. I am Joseph St. John. I have 30 years of law enforcement experience. I have been everything from up to a captain and went over and with the Newport News Police Department. I was the captain up there. And then after a while, spent about 3 years being the chief of police in Columbus, Mississippi. So just to let people know, that I've been watching the show because we're getting ready to go more into some true crime and legitimate cases, what our background is, and 30 years of law enforcement here. So, Mr. Baker, a little introduction on you.
Yeah, I'm Robert Baker. I'm a practicing attorney in a little town called Allegan, Michigan. I have been a Michigan attorney since 1997. I have a wide and varied practice. I do a lot of criminal defense. I do custody work, family law, civil litigation, a lot of David and Goliath, big guys beating up on little people that I fight for. And more salient to Joe's background, Joe, you were head of homicide at one point.
Yes, in Newport News. Yes, I was in charge of homicide and got in a chance to experience a lot of things and a lot of good training. One of the nice things as I moved up the ranks was the intensity of the training. And I think that that's a good example of at least I got an opportunity to get a bite of a lot of different things. And I think that'll go a long way when we discuss these, not just the cases, but the training involved, which we'll get into in a minute, because I do think there's some things that happen with people who have not been trained.
Right.
Sometimes.
And you also were involved in murder investigations in Mississippi, correct?
Yes. I mean, we got, I was in a small town in Columbus, and we had murders, and we've been dealing with some past murders, which there's some interesting situations in Columbus before I got here with some past murders, but I don't want to go down that rabbit hole yet.
Right. But that segues into why we're here today, which is that we are going to begin our discussions of the Michigan murders, what's been deemed as Michigan murders, or the co-ed murders that occurred between 1967 and 1969. And depending on whose count you take, as far as victims go, there is at least 7 victims in the Ann Arbor, Ypsilanti area, and up to 30, 50 more where Mr. Collins and his compadres were traveling across the United States at any given point. But we're starting today with Mary Flescher. I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly. That's the way they pronounced it in a couple of the different books. There's been several books written about this, and there's been a 48 Hours and several TV shows. Our interest in it is a guy who was convicted of the third murder, which was Gary Leiterman is the guy who was convicted, and the victim, her name was Jane Mixer, but we'll get into that. But we're starting out with Mary Flescher, who was actually 19 in 1967. And Joe, you've done some research on this, as have I.
Yes.
So what's your take on her disappearance?
19 years old. And I think it's real important here. And I want to backtrack on something that we said. As of this discussion, the assumption is that John Norman Collins did these murders. We'll talk about the Mixer thing and Gary's conviction. But for the most part, we're going to talk about, because that was the way up until some strange stuff happened that we don't want to go down the rabbit hole yet. Collins was seen as the murderer. Now, as we go through these things, you're going to see that there could have been more people involved. You're going to see some real inconsistencies with just saying one person did it. And you're going to see some consistencies where people said there was no consistency. And we'll get to that in a little bit. But dealing with Mary, and we do hope we have there, and we're going to go with Flescher.
Yes.
And hopefully that is the correct pronunciation of her name. And the one thing about her, she's at Eastern Michigan University. And the last time anybody saw her alive was July 9th, 1967. Now, just to give you a little bit of background, there were neighbors. A neighbor saw her twice being approached by a car. Because she's out walking, heading towards and around her apartment. And she is being approached by somebody and she looks like she's waving them off. Now, looking at this or reading this in hindsight, you'd be thinking, oh, why didn't they call the police and all that? And I want to explain something to you. And I'm not trying to be a know-it-all. Let me explain that. Don't put your values on what happened. Because, see, at the end of the day, you know she was murdered. The person watching it might have thought they were just in a domestic. Okay? Or it was just somebody trying to pick somebody up, which we'll get into that later. Okay? So get that out of there. Because one of the problems I see with some people who write is that all of a sudden they're profilers. Okay? And that's not where you need to go right now. You need to just focus on she's walking around in her neighborhood. She went out, if I believe it was hot, in her apartment.
That's
and
fine.
She wanted to just get out of the apartment, which, by the way, in some of the books we've read, and we'll give everybody credit as time goes, but in our research, that was kind of unusual that she did that. Okay. She is basically in the, I always got crazy here, and I just want to make sure we pronounce everything right. Ypsilanti?
Ypsilanti. Yeah.
Ypsilanti. Okay. I want to make sure we get everything right. Ypsilanti. We want to make sure we get everything right. A lot of Two Average Joes, we allowed to be free formed, and we mispronounce something, we didn't worry about it. But this time I want to make sure we're very professional on that. So Ypsilanti. And we want to make sure that we got that. One of the things that happened was that everybody said that Gary's case, I do want to go a little bit back to it, was that basically that case was really different because she was in a different direction. And that was not true. And I think it'd be a good time to kind of show the map to give everybody a view of that.
Sure.
If you see everybody's situation, everybody is in basically the same area. You can see right now where Mary was. You can see where Jane Mixer was. You can see where all of the victims in that area showed up. And there is, at least from just viewing it here, and we got to give the Detroit Free Press credit because they're the one that posted this, is that there is a situation where you're watching this and you see that the things are closer than you would make it sound. It's not like they were like one of them was here and the next one was so far off the map that you can't cover it. So that's real important. We want to share that with you. That's part of what we have to deal with is going back, is that people's view of what's far away. Because it's easy to go, is a mile far away, is 5 miles away, 10 miles away. Always remember this, he killed somebody in California. Was that too far off the map?
Yeah, right.
And that's where you get into the point sometimes where I worry that people who don't have a lot of training, and I'm just going to be honest with you, they believe that everything has to be this many miles, this many feet, this many yards, or it's too far. Well, here's the problem with that. He killed somebody in California. Okay, so we want to stay focused on, here's the map, here's what we have. Let's not get lost in putting everything in this little circle. I think that we need to make sure that doesn't happen. So, we see the map, we see that, there's not this gigantic difference, but even if there was, remember somebody was murdered in California and he did it. Okay. Yeah. So I think that's one of the things that we go. So, we're looking at, basically what's happening at this period of time. And July, she gets picked up. That is just basically everybody's assumption. Am I right?
Yeah. A little bit of background though. So she is a Eastern Michigan University student, which is in Ypsilanti, and she's an accounting student. And she worked as a secretary in the Eastern Michigan University Field Services Building, which is going to come into play in the second murder, which John Norman Collins he shows up. he is the thread that ties all these things together.
Mhm.
And the law enforcement says that the one that we're most interested in, which is Jane Mixer, is different. And Joe has pointed out on numerous occasions, all of them are different.
Yes. When you see this, there's just like everybody, they're all different.
So this being the first known murder attributed to John Norman Collins in this Michigan murder thing. John Norman Collins, I believe he was 19 or 20 at the time of this murder.
Mm-hmm.
And he was a student at Eastern Michigan University he was trying to get an education degree, it's my understanding. Miss Flescher was walking down the road from her house on 413 Washington Avenue. What I could not find, which I believe is in a book called Catching Serial Killers by Michigan State Police Lieutenant Earl James, is he lived very close to there. And I believe it's implied in his book that he may have dated her. I don't know if you recall that. Do you recall that, Joe?
Yeah, there was some connection with him, which we're going to get into that a little bit.
Right. And she was walking, and I believe a neighbor had seen the car. Either it was a two-tone bluish gray two-tone car, and at least in the Fournier book, Ypsilanti, Terror in Ypsilanti, it doesn't say specifically what the car was.
Right.
But
there is some people that will say it was a Chevrolet.
Right. Yeah. And I believe that John Norman Collins' mother may have had that similar vehicle at the time, but we'll have to confirm that. Yeah. So Miss Flescher is walking down the road somewhere around her apartment or her rooming house on 413 Washington Avenue in Ypsilanti. Some guy is trying to pick her up, either known or unknown, correct?
Correct.
And she disappears. So she is picked up by this guy. There's no witness saying she was thrown in the car.
Right.
And so, Joe, it's your take, whether she knew this guy or not.
We know there's a conversation. Somebody's seen that, and she, at least a couple of conversations. And there's interaction. So we can go with that. Now, her getting in the car, nobody saw that. But we got to be honest, nobody saw a struggle either. And once again, she's near her house. Okay. Now, one of the things that if when you do looks in there and, the books we have read and the research we have done, and again, we want to give everybody full credit that as we go through this, we'll make sure we list everybody that, we've looked at. But one of the intriguing things about it is she was a pretty simple person, and we'll get into that before. I mean, her biggest thing was that she had actually, and I want to make sure I get this right here. So let me go ahead and get this here. And again, we want to be accurate. We do not want to be just off there. So I want to make sure I'm right. So, like I said, if you've watched our other episodes, we can be pretty, crazy and, but we're not going to be today. I want to be accurate. Okay. Her biggest thing, and this is just a good example because this was who she was. Her big adventure was that in June of 1967, her and some of her friends went to Expo 67 in Montreal.
Yeah.
Now, again, I want to put everything in perspective. That was a huge deal. Expo 67 was a big deal. The Washington Nationals baseball team, for those that don't know, used to be in Montreal. And the Expos were so big that they were called the Montreal Expos. So you named an entire baseball team over this event. Okay? So it's a big event. So this isn't like, they just want to go to Montreal and stuff. This is a huge event. But up into her time in her life, this is the biggest event in her life.
Well, and two things come into play there. One is that she purchased a new outfit and new shoes for that event, to go to that expo just not very, 30 days prior to, or however long it was prior
Yeah.
to her disappearance. But also, she had acquired, I think, a medallion or a coin from that expo,
Right.
which comes into play later on. But I just wanted to point it out that that expo was important to not only her, but to the potential discovery of who abducted and killed her.
Yes.
So I just wanted to make that point.
Yeah, that's a big deal. And remember, it's her sister and two friends go, and that's her big event. She was very involved in church. She was a musician.
Yeah.
From everything I read, she's just, I don't use simple bad. I mean, but this is not a person who would have been out adventuring looking for people to pick her up.
Yeah, we'll put it in the notes, but her family has a pretty nice website
Yes.
For her, and it really lays out in a humanistic form of who she was as a person, and a really good picture of her, so that you can get a flavor and a feeling. And that's what Joe and I had said from the very beginning, that we want this more to be victim centered than just the murderer, which is usually what most shows.
And we want you to look at that, and I'll have that down there. It's just a beautiful thing that they did for her, and they have kept her memory alive, which I am very impressed with. But again, you don't want to do too much of, oh, she asked for it or stuff, but we're just trying to describe the person. And from everything that I have done when I have read or anything we've seen, that this is a person that she would have not been out looking for just somebody to pick her up, which goes back to your part in some of your research and some of the books you've read, where they have basically said they may have been some of knowing each other. Okay.
Right.
And that's real important because it goes there. But now here's where you have to start getting in there, and we don't want to be and soft sell anything. We want to be real honest with everybody. One of the things that occurs too during all of this is when she disappears, it is going to be basically a month before anybody finds the body.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's basically a month before anybody finds the body. Now, it's two 15-year-old boys that find her body, and she's nude. And she's basically found in a abandoned farm in the Superior Township. Okay. And I think if we can do it, we can kind of show a map on that. So let me go ahead and do that. Again, Detroit Free Press, we thank you. And here is the map.
This is a photo of the actual farm. And know that she was found on August the 7th, 1967, by these couple of teenagers who see, and I believe it's behind that brown vehicle that's almost in the center of the second picture to the right. I believe that's the pile of garbage that she was found on, and it appeared to be, and in this article, which will also be below, it shows a picture of it. It looked like they thought it was a deer carcass.
Right.
And so this is in an abandoned farm way off as you can see in the circular driveway or whatever, way off the road. So the perpetrator could probably do whatever the heck he wanted back there. And it appeared, I think, that the body had been moved a few times. Was it this
3 times? They're saying it was moved 3 times.
Right. And it was in such decay, and it appeared that there were at least 30 stab wounds.
Yes.
So it was stabbed multiple times, and the fingers and the feet were cut off.
Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, see, this is where the interesting, all of these are the same except mixer situation. I don't think he dismembered anybody else, did he? If I remember.
No, he brutalized, I think, the second one too, with the multiple stab wounds.
Yeah, but this was a dismemberment, and again, that's why we don't want to get into, being junior, junior detectives here where, we're going to say everything's the same. And then this one is a definite different situation. Also, I don't want to get into yes or no on some things. And that's clear when we follow this. We don't want to get into yes or no. But the body is so decomposed that they don't know if she was sexually assaulted. And I believe that's very, very important. And when we get into some other situations, you're going to go, because here's what we don't want to do is we do not want to enter the world of the quantum leap, which is what I think when I've read some of the books has happened. It's like, well, she was nude, so she had to be sexually assaulted. Well, no, you don't know that. The facts say that they don't know. Okay? So you don't go yes or no, and you don't make decisions based on what you think would have happened. Now, you can speculate, and we will have to at times, but I would like to think that we will clarify we are speculating. Okay? Because she is decomposed enough now that they don't know that. Okay? We do know that it's overkill. And we do know that there's some savagery there.
Yeah, frenzy.
Yeah. Now, here's an interesting thing. And kind of a different sense of timing on all of this is she's moved 3 times. Now, speculating, okay, we don't know who moved her, what moved her, how they moved her. And again, if family members ever watch this, I do not want to be gross, but we don't know how it is. And I want to make sure I have this done here. We don't know how it got moved, and I don't have a specific how far it was moved. And just follow me here. And again, if family members are ever watching this, I don't want to be gross. We don't know how it got moved. We don't know if people went back and moved it. And now I'm going to be direct. You don't know if animals moved it.
Right.
Okay. Anybody has to understand this if you are discussing murder scenes in which the body is left outside. Animals affect the crime scene. Yeah. Animals move bodies. We know that the appendages that were severed because they knew animals didn't do it. It wasn't done through animals. Okay. Right. But again, not trying to for a lot of people that think, the body lays there, somebody hit. I don't know that. They could have came back and moved. We don't know. That's because they were speculating. But understand, anytime you have a body that is left outside, you have to incorporate that animals will affect that crime scene. Okay?
The movement section, though, I'm sorry to interject, but didn't the teenagers hear some doors slamming or something like that?
And I believe they heard 2 voices.
There we go. So I just wanted to bring that in because you and me, have talked about it, and we think that there are multiple perpetrators.
And when you see not the next episode, because the next episode we're going to do is kind of a follow-up on this one to clarify anything maybe we mistake it.
Right.
Okay? We're mistaken. But when we get to the second victim, you'll understand that. Now, without being the junior profiler, okay, being just blunt with you, it is not unusual for people who commit crimes to go back and look at it. Just like a lot of times with people who do arsons, they'll go watch the fire. Okay? So them coming back is not unusual. 2 voices, and as we build through this case here, you will see there's many times where there's 3 people, somebody talking, the California trip. We know they heard 2 voices.
Yeah. And just to interject also what we didn't talk about, because we'd have to fast forward to 2005, but so there's all these murders, and the eventual murderer of the last victim, John Norman Collins, is convicted. Mm-hmm. So in somewhere around 2003 or 4, the Michigan, I think it was the state police, it could have been Ypsilanti or Ann Arbor cops, but they pull out all of these cases, all 7 of them, and they submit them all for DNA testing. Okay, now what's unknown, at least to you and me, was this Flescher case submitted for DNA. Okay, were any swabs taken of any orifices that would have resulted in DNA?
Mhm.
And if there was any result. So I just wanted to put that out there that we haven't, and I sent out several FOIA, which is a Freedom of Information Act requests for different things. And I have 3 bankers boxes because I was involved in this case for Gary Leiterman on the edge of it. He was seeking the Innocence Project to take over. But so that is unknown at this point, whether the DNA was done on this original, what is thought to be the original victim, and
Right.
whether that one comes back to John Norman Collins or any of the other who we
Did any
saw.
of them come back to John? And again, I don't want to go down this too far because then we'll be off of this, and I don't want that.
Right. Right.
But there is something about this case again that it becomes odd. We do know they hurt 2 people. Okay, they hurt a car. What got their attention, if I'm not mistaken?
That's my understanding.
Okay.
2-door slam, I think.
Yeah. So, you have that happening. They go there and they see the body. They think it's a deer carcass. And, as sad as that may sound, that's a month out let me be blunt, a month out in nature for a body is a long time.
Yeah. You got insect infestation.
Yeah.
There were gnaw marks, or it appeared to be teeth marks on bones and stuff like that. So,
like I said, we're just being real. If we're going to do this, we're going to keep it real.
yeah.
Now, a brutal overkill. And also, again, we're dealing with some of the other stuff that's happened there. They do not know if she was sexually assaulted or not. Now, like I said, I don't want to go into we can pretty much sure she was because you pretty much can't say that. Okay. We don't know all of the details on that. But here's where it gets to be interesting. And I want to make sure I got this right. Okay. And when I read some stuff, they'll say the murderer moved the body 3 feet, and I don't know that. Okay, I don't know that. But I do know this: body was moved, and did somebody move it to put it more into the light so somebody would find it, or again, like I said, does it have something to do with nature and animals and just the nature of what happens when bodies are out exposed? Okay. Now, it gets even more interesting on this because this is as strange as you'll see or hear. 2 days after they were done, they get ready to take them to the funeral home. So the body is now at the funeral home. And again, we talked to the point where we don't mention it anymore. The body is in very bad shape. And what happens when the body's at the funeral home, Mr. Baker?
Some young male shows up and asks the funeral director or whoever's working at the funeral parlor if he can take pictures of the body.
Right. Yeah, that is not something that would be normal under any circumstance. And this is not a situation where you have to understand time and place. That would always been inappropriate.
Right.
Okay. And of course, the body was in that shape to get a picture, but it stuck with him that he came there. He wanted to, as somebody said here, get a picture of her as a keepsake for the family. Well, I'm sure the family didn't ask for that.
No, not in the condition the body was. And then secondarily, he didn't have a camera on him.
Yeah. So unfortunately, just other than the fact that he was a handsome young white male with dark hair that had driven a blue-gray Chevrolet, and he'd not been carrying a camera, they didn't have much of a description. Mm-hmm. Again, don't think that people remember people. They don't. They don't remember. You think they do because in some TV show, somebody can give you a total description of them, but they don't.
And it's in 1967 too, I would assume, that's just an assumption. We were 5 at the time, whatever.
Yeah.
That people were more trusting back then.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it would, and I'm also going to say something here too, and this is being speculative, and I want to put that out there, but sometimes in bizarre situations, people will become very zoomed on, right? It's weird, so I'm going to pay attention. Other people are caught off guard. And think about in your own life, how many times you've been caught off guard and it's like somebody said something to you really strange and you're thinking, wow, man, I should have paid more attention. Okay.
Mm.
That's not an unusual reaction either way, zooming in or being caught off guard.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's there. But, you know, when going into the Collins situation, and I'm not here to discuss whether or not he's attractive, and I don't want to get lost again on
Mhm.
details that will come up later. He was a bodybuilder, basically.
You're right.
And he was, by a lot of people's description, as being an attractive person.
Well, women have, I mean, there's a lot of different interviews with women that said that he was an attractive guy. So,
Yeah. So, you know, there you go. So you got that in there. And, you know, you would think that people, you know, give you totally everything, tell them. But, you know, I mean, outside of what they said, maybe that was all they noticed. You know, it'd have been nice if they had picked up something else. But here's the deal. That's not the way eyewitnesses work. And we had a conversation before we started. Eyewitnesses are dicey. All eyewitnesses are dicey.
mhm.
I think you could make an argument that actually you remember how you felt about it all. Okay. That this happened and this is how it made me feel and this is what we got. As opposed to, I think people remember using this as an example. And again, little speculation to say the least, but just dealing with people who, when you deal with witnesses, a lot of times people will tell you, it happened. I was so scared. I didn't really pay that much of attention. Now they remember being scared. Okay. And I don't want to get lost on me, but when I was younger, I was working at McDonald's. We got robbed. I was able to give a description of the guy, but his gun was this big. You know, everybody understand what I'm saying? I really don't know. It just
Mhm.
looked that way since the fact that I thought he might kill us. Okay. And I'm just being direct with you.
Yeah.
Okay. I can remember giving a pretty good description. But when they asked me about the gun, I was like, yeah, I think that thing was huge because that's the way it looked to me.
Mhm.
You remember, and if you really are honest with yourself, you remember a lot of what you feel or how it emotionally impacted you. So even when you're picking up things like a jacket, a bandana, a hoodie, jeans, all of these things, you're still remembering some things like I was scared, you know, he seemed aggressive, he didn't seem aggressive. So we carry that emotional aspect, it's not baggage, but emotional aspect with us when we're dealing with stuff. So I think that that's a very, very interesting situation. Um, Again, I think, and I'll have a link down there, take a time to look at the family's page because I thought that was extremely, very classy and very respectful.
Yeah.
She's 19 years old.
Yeah.
She's in school. Okay. She has her whole life in front of her.
Yep.
And
Her
you know,
interests, her interests are on there and her family background. It is really well done. I was surprised.
yeah. And you know what? This is one of those situations too, place and time. We mentioned that in the last two episodes that we did. We really wanted to set the 60s up. People were a little more trusting, a little bit more, everything's going to be okay.
Mhm.
Okay. And, you know, like I said, you got one, you know, source where it's kind of like they may have known each other. They went to the same school. And though I do not even believe in 1967 that Eastern Michigan would have been a small community college, I'm sure it had quite a large amount of students. That also doesn't mean that they didn't cross paths.
Right.
So there's a lot of things that could go on there. I think that one of the things that we deal with her is that we're going to call this, because to the best of our knowledge, this is the first murder. To the best of our knowledge. Okay.
Yeah.
And it is brutal. It is savage. And it is actually, I want to call it planned out. Because removing body parts and stuff, he was doing that for a reason. Okay. I'm not going to speculate what that reason was, but from what I remember, he got the feet off and what else? I know some of the fingers.
Yep. Fingers and feet were cut off. Yeah.
Yeah.
And, not to try to sway people's decision-making process, but John Norman Collins' uncle was a Michigan State Police.
Yes.
And I don't know what it was in 67, but he was at least a trooper.
Yeah, he was a police. He was a police officer. He was involved in law enforcement. And from everything that we have read, Collins was a police group.
That's what it appears. There was a bomber restaurant over in Ypsilanti that all the police would go to in the morning, and different police agencies, officers, troopers, and detectives would go there and eat, and John Norman Collins would hang there with all these different people. Not saying, that he, that we're saying he's the one, but I'm just trying to lay the background.
Mm-hmm.
And he was definitely an Eastern Michigan student. And in the second murder, he is threaded throughout the Eastern Michigan campus. And he also is believed to have gone in that student center where Miss Flescher worked. So, not to jump ahead,
but to keep that in mind, and it's very important that he took the feet, the thumb, and sections of the fingers of one hand and the forearm of the other. So I'm assuming that would have been the whole hand all the way down. So the only way they could identify her was through dental records.
Right. And also what was important was her shoe was found on the scene, the one that she bought to go to the expo.
Yeah.
That her parents positively identified that as being hers.
Yeah. There is an interesting aspect of that where that humanizes it. We talked about that when you see personal items, that humanizes it. And trust me, it really humanizes it for families too.
For me. And I see all kinds of heinous stuff, and you have too your whole career, I'm sure.
It is a personal stuff, like giving people back personal effects when there has been a murder, or even as tragic as it is, a car accident, and there isn't the murder aspect, but they've passed. Giving back personal belongings is a horrible thing, because it is a sign that it is real.
Right.
So you have that. What we're going to do in our next episode is we're going to come back and go over some of this. Just kind of after we review it, mention some things, bring it back, because we want specifics. And again, we said this in the first two episodes. These are human beings. These are people who had their life snuffed out for no reason. Nobody did anything to deserve this. Okay, I am adamant about that in all of these. Okay, and people who were in many, many, many ways, and especially in the situation that we're talking about with Mary, she's a very simple, kind, 19-year-old young lady who isn't looking for trouble. I'm just be blunt with you. She isn't looking for trouble, and trouble found her. And that's the kind of thing. So we want to go back next episode and kind of revisit some things, make sure that we covered everything, closed all the loopholes, and treated her with the respect that we wanted to.
Yeah. And not to forget, though, that we had said that she had picked up that medallion or coin. So John Norman Collins, eventually I don't know about the investigation. It seemed to be, I don't want to say bungled, might be too harsh of a word, but there were a bunch of missteps made by law enforcement when they went to go arrest him, possibly because his uncle was then a sergeant in the Michigan State Police. But they had found a 1967 medallion related to the Montreal Expo that had occurred in his possession, that Mary Flescher had purchased one at the Expo. So that kind of brings it home to why we believe, and we didn't talk about it because Joe and I have at least I look at it with a jaundiced eye, these behavioral people who try to say this is, what is it called, when the psychologist is trying to list out who does the crime?
Yeah, the profilers.
The profilers. So I have my real doubts about it because they go, well, it's a white male under 35. Well,
that's a pretty big hunk of the population.
a pretty big hunk of the population. And then
millions.
What happened in DC, what happened in Atlanta.
I don't want to get lost on DC with the sniper shooting because that's a whole other episode.
Right.
But I watch videos now where there's FBI people patting themselves on back how good they did. No, it was horrible. So I want to be real careful on the profile. And I do want to say this, and it is not taking up for law enforcement, nor is it criticizing law enforcement. But if you read some books and you research this, this was way above what any of them had done before.
Yeah, because serial killer was not in the terminology and lexicon of law enforcement at the time. And that was why we said in our first episode leading into this was Dar Norman Collins may be one of the most prolific serial killers in the United States. And he is basically unknown outside of, true crime aficionados because of Charles Manson and what he did out in California. It just...
And let me add a bit of background on something that I said about the serial killers. In Newport News, before I joined the police department, we had a serial killer in Newport News. And our detectives, through beautiful work, again, had nothing with me, I wasn't even on the department yet, okay? But he was able to arrest this person. And that person got the death penalty. Okay, so I will say that the investigators did a fine job. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But I can still remember this. This was these guys were seasoned. They were really good investigators. I mean, just probably the best of the best we had in Newport News at the time. And eventually, these were seasoned guys, keep that in mind. As time progressed, they retired, right? And I remember we were just sitting around the break room or driving down the road, whatever it was, making small talk. And somebody, and I wish I could remember who brilliantly said this. I could give him credit. They said, so-and-so's retired. He goes, he's the last one of that group that did that serial killing. He goes, you do know when he walks out the door, he's the last guy that's done this. Nobody else has done it before.
Right.
He goes, there's nobody that's done it. He goes, maybe we could bring him back if we had one. And the other guys, right? I mean, they were all alive. They just weren't on the department anymore. And I remember thinking, that is really fascinating and also really true.
Mm-hmm.
Those guys had actually worked a serial killer. He was a serial killer that went through 3 or 4 different jurisdictions. They arrested him, convicted him, got the death penalty, and saw it carried out.
Right.
Okay. So to say they were experienced, for anybody that don't know, when you're working a case that has a death penalty, there's a lot of follow-up on that. Okay, this isn't the Wild West. And when they left, I thought, yeah, that's true. That's true. Not saying and here's the deal, not saying we didn't have great detectives. Not saying that those guys hadn't taught other detectives what they did. Not that other people hadn't signed up and worked with them after the fact. But to carry that out, that investigation from the beginning to the end with all the appeals and have the death penalty carried out.
Mm-hmm.
No, they were all gone. So that's not a slap when I say if you read any of this, you follow us, there were some missteps, and that's just factual.
Yeah.
And there were just missteps. That's not an insult. Because if you hadn't done it, you haven't done it.
Yeah. Let's set the context too. So this is in law enforcement's estimation, the first murder to occur. So there was no serialness to it yet.
Yes.
So what would happen, and I believe it was 69, late 68 or 69, they would set up a task force of multiple different law enforcement agencies to have up to 60 officers working on trying to solve these. But it hadn't occurred because this was just an outlier, just a murder that had occurred in 1967. and the next one wouldn't occur for another year. Okay. And so I just wanted to set the context for where we're heading. Okay. The third murder is our focus, which is Jane Mixer. Okay. She was a University of Michigan law student. And that is who Gary Leiterman was eventually convicted of in 05 or 06 of this murder that occurred in 1969. But to lay it out in context, it was just local law enforcement, I believe, at that time, which would have been the Ypsilanti Police Department and maybe the county that it was in. I believe it was Washington. That would be investigating it at that point, and they didn't solve it. Anytime. It's still unsolved as of today, I believe.
Yeah, I think there was a lot of he did it, and they got one conviction, and that again, that loophole, and I mentioned it in the other episodes. That loophole is how Gary got caught into that.
Yeah, and to just tick off the boxes that we know, John Norman Collins was an Eastern Michigan University student at the time. He eventually worked at that field house that she worked at, or the student place where she worked. Don't know whether 67, and I'll try to find that by the little addendum or whatever we're going to do for the next thing. Blue gray car, Chevrolet. We believe his mother had one at the time, John Norman Collins' mother. That may or may not be factual. But for sure he had that Expo coin that Mary Flescher had picked up at the Expo. So those things, just to lay it out in the very beginning, were just he is a suspect and probably should have been a prime suspect. Right. And we don't know at the time whether they were even looking at him for that.
And I want to add this here. Understand it when we talk this. Keep in the back of your mind, and we'll mention it again. He has a relative who is a law enforcement, and he is a police groupie.
Yeah.
So he's paying attention. So I think that's real important.
Yeah.
So what we're going to do is there'll be some links in there. One of the things that we really want to do here, and just ending this on a note of Two Average Joes, is regardless of what platform you're watching this, we're all over on anything that you can listen to on podcast. Okay. You don't get to see the pictures, obviously, but we do the podcast. We are on 3 different platforms for video. Okay. So you could be listening or watching this on upward to 20 different platforms. Okay. So it doesn't matter what platform you're on. It's really important that you go down there, look at the links, Charge. I put it on everything. Okay. And the most important thing that you can do is leave a comment. You have a question, let us know, hit the like button, leave us a comment. We're not fundraising for any specific person or cause. Okay. But we would appreciate your support. And I know that, when we talk about that, a lot of times people will, go, I don't know if you should ask that. Well, here's the deal. What I'd like to do, to be honest with you, I think there's some traveling to do. There's some people we need to bring on board. And this is not the most expensive website podcast in the entire world, but any support you can give to us, we would really appreciate it. And, I've talked to people both ways. It's like, got to be honest with you. We've done a lot of these. I think a lot of times we don't really emphasize enough. This is a business and a job. We're taking it very, very serious. And I would really like to be able to do this at the highest quality level that we can. And, if you want to support us and help us, I'm going to encourage you to support us and help us. Okay. Anything you can do for us, we appreciate. But it is free to hit the like button, leave a comment, ask a question. Because the next time that we come to you, we are going to be doing a follow-up. So we appreciate it. Anything you want to add, Mr. Baker?
Hit the subscribe button if it's available.
Hit the subscribe button if it's available. Give us some support. We really want to do this. We want to get other people involved. And to be honest with you, I'll be the first one to tell you, I'd like to grow this. I would like to get us to be able to get even more people involved. This is an important case. And as you see this grow and you see what happens to Gary, you'll fully understand what I'm talking about. So anything else?
Only, so we're in the very first murder of however many, 50 or 100 that we believe that the ultimate convicted murderer did, that we had first laid the groundwork for the time and place that it was doing. We went through pretty succinctly, or as best as we could, 1968 and 69 to set the groundwork of what was going on. And we didn't really mention it in this one, but we were starting to, the campuses were starting to really heat up as to the Vietnam War. The music was raging. You know, our cultural side of things were, there was drugs and sex and all this other stuff, though Miss Flescher didn't appear to have anything to do with any of that. She was just walking down the street on a hot evening. And so we wanted to set that stage for what's going to come up to be the second murder, but we're going to do an addendum in between because I didn't get to do the full research. There's a book out there written by Earl James that is very difficult read because it doesn't look like he had an editor. But he was the person in the Michigan State Police that congregated and was the, I don't know what you call it in the police force, but he kept all the evidence.
Yes.
And so he had a lot of inside knowledge. And unfortunately, the first book that was written was from Edward Keyes, I believe, who wrote The French Connection. But he had changed all the names back then because evidently he either wanted to be respectful or he didn't want to be sued. So
Right.
The Michigan Murder book is a good book that lays out all of it, but it's very confusing. And then Ed James, he changed the names in his book, the unedited one. So it's a horrendous read. And I believe Joe read it or attempted to read it, didn't you?
I have read parts of it. But I want to be really careful because he's written more than I have on it.
All right, true that. But so anyway, I just wanted to lay that out that we're trying to spend the time to, one, humanize the victim, and then thread through each individual event and what was going on around it so that you can have a complete picture. Really, there isn't any good definitive book on the Michigan murders, okay?
No, there's not.
There's Fournier, Mr. Fournier put out in 2016, Terror in Ypsilanti, and I would commend you to read it.
Yeah, I would have everybody read it. And I'll tell you what, I think everybody has done a good job and they get it. But I will tell you, after even listening to some other podcasts, this is why when we say there's nothing definitive, it doesn't mean that some of the work's not outstanding. And I will tell you it's outstanding. It's better than what I've done. So I'm definitely going to tell you that. But everything has a flow to it. Like, you know, you have to be careful that things change, and you go to talk to people. Arthur one talks to somebody and he gets one view of it. He goes and talks to another person, he gets another view. Another guy comes to write a book, he talks to a third person. It doesn't mean that any of this is not true. It all could be true. It's just, always remember this: witness is perspective, not fact always. It's perspective. So you can have people write and talk to different people and get a little bit different feel. So I don't know if anybody's ever pulled it all together and stuck it in one package. That would be the best way to put it.
They definitely haven't written about Gary Leiterman, okay, which is our
Gary has been brutally neglected.
Yes.
And when we get to the Gary story, and we will point that out. Everybody, I think, though, needs to see all the murders, and we'll talk about Mixon.
Yeah.
We'll talk about Mixon. But then we're going to come back because I want everybody to hear everything before we go into Gary, because you have to see the total package.
Yeah, you really do, because and just put this into context also is that the third murder, which they called it was a copycat murder.
Mm-hmm.
We've only talked about one, and then there's one more, and then they're saying that Gary Leiterman woke up one day and did this third murder in 1969.
Yeah. There was nothing to copy, but we don't want to go into the inside information. Would not have been Gary.
Yeah.
It would have been John Collins that had inside information. But we'll talk.
I mean, and most of them, most books and everything believe it was. I mean, Fournier is the only one who which we'll get into, but
yeah, no, it's not going to
I met with Fournier in this office and discussed this case.
But we'll handle that.
Yeah.
We want to keep everything. Let's keep it. Everybody come back, because there's a lot on that.
There is a ton. I mean, we haven't even
There's a lot.
scratched even part of the surface.
So be ready for our next episode. We're going to do a follow-up on this one and talk about Mary, and we're going to talk about that and check the links out here. I think you'll be interested, and you'll want to know. So until next time, we will see you then, and we will follow this up. And
So
you got it. We'll talk later, guys. Everybody have a great life until we get back.